Hey there, Cookie Pocket listener. Zach here. We typically don't do this kind of thing, but for this film, I thought it was appropriate to give a little bit of a warning that we discuss some pretty heavy subject matter in this episode, specifically involving murder and suicide. Spoiler, in regard to the end of the film. If you are sensitive to that kind of thing or aren't interested in hearing that kind of discussion, I advise that you click away when Mitchell does bring up the ending. Otherwise, please enjoy the episode.
Are we here?
We are.
Amazing.
Yeah, present.
Present. Zachary Garrigus.
Yes.
No, you're supposed to... Okay.
Oh, I'm here.
This is episode 31 of Cookie Pocket. This podcast is about film. We're discussing The Mist, of which is a 2007 sci-fi horror film directed by Frank Darabont and adapted from Stephen King's 1980 novel of the same name. Which is a similar situation with The Shawshank Redemption and The Green Mile that Darabont also adapted.
Mm-hmm.
It deals with a small Maine town that is enveloped in a mysterious mist full of scaly monsters, and there is a somewhat large group of people held up in a grocery store or supermarket to be more globally inclusive. With the lead character, a movie poster artist named David Drayton, is with his son, and probably wondering what type of film he's living in so he can kill the production team and run. The film stars Thomas Jane as Drayton, Marcia Gray Harden as Mrs. Carmody, Laurie Holden as Amanda Dunphy, Andre Brower as Brent, and Toby Jones as Ollie Weeks, as well as Sam Witwer, who is the cause of all of their pain.
Well.
So, first off, what did you lads think of the film?
Well, I really like this film. I'm glad you chose this movie, actually, Mitchell, because I've seen this movie before, and I think quite highly of it, but it's not one that I tend to rewatch very often, just because I'm not really ever compelled to. But I think it's very good. I think it's one of the best Stephen King adaptations, actually. Frank Darabont is a director who I think really understands Stephen King and the themes that lie at the heart of Stephen King. And I think he and this film really get that the scary stuff in a Stephen King story is not the monsters and the things that go bump in the night. The scary stuff is the people, and the way that people in both his stories and in the real world will turn on each other like that as soon as they're scared. That's where the most frightening stuff in this comes from. The monsters are kind of typical B-movie fare, but they are recontextualized in a way that I think is genuinely threatening. It's a 4 out of 5 for me. I think it's a really effective horror movie. Iffy special effects here and there, but I think the story is strong enough to kind of overcome those.
Okay, Christian?
Okay. I ultimately did enjoy this. I gave it a 3 out of 5, but I would like to correct Zach. The special effects were not iffy. They were genuinely terrible pretty much everywhere, at least in my opinion. And I know I've been spoiled by ILM and what have you, but I did find that immensely distracting, and I understand there are budgetary constraints and whatever, but I do agree, Zach, that what you said about the most frightening part of the story being the people and not necessarily the monsters. I totally agree, and I agree that was the focus. But I think one way that this film might have improved for me a bit is if they showed the monsters less. I had a pretty wild up and down ride as I was watching this, trying to figure out what I thought of it. In the first 6 minutes or so, they were just like talking, and there's this tree down, and it's kind of like, oh, they have exposition, blah blah. And then once we get in the store, and they're like, oh, this is like a closed room thriller horror thing. Okay, this is captivating. This is a nice premise. And but gradually, as we saw more and more of the CGI, I ultimately became less invested in it the more I saw creatures. And I understand that, like, once the window breaks, you kind of have to show more just to get the action in there. But when he's like swinging the broomstick or whatever, and it's just like a pink blur, it was very distracting to me, at least. And so I was struggling between, like, I didn't know whether to criticize the hammy performances or to realize that really that makes sense, because these people are presented with life-altering hysteria and potential death, and so it makes sense for them to be acting unnaturally and unusually. So and I understand that part of the point is this whole like B-movie aesthetic or whatever, but I still felt like there were very frustrating like horror movie tropes for me. Like when they're in the pharmacy and they hear something, but instead of just like leaving immediately, they decide to linger.
Well, they have to get the medication. They have to get the silver
really,
sulfidide.
Zach?
Yes, because the man is...
Is that really more important than...
They
What's
know
more
it's a
important,
dangerous
getting
situation.
this very specific medicine, or making sure you don't freaking die in 5 seconds?
They knew they could die in 5 seconds. They went over there to get the sulfidide to help the guy who's burning. Oh
yeah, but
I'm sorry, Your Honor. I'm sorry.
Because... No. But they lost more lives because of how... Okay. It is true that more people died because of how much time they took, and that is simply true. And furthermore, I lost my train of thought. And there's another instance.
You're talking
that really
about
bothered me.
Attack of the Clones.
Yes, we are. This is what this is. Yeah, and if we would like to compare special effects between the two, then be my guest.
No.
But the other moment that really bothered me is when he opens the door to reach for the gun, and he's just standing there reaching and
that
reaching.
Could be better filmed.
But he's not really leaning forward. He's not making any effort to walk around the door. He's just holding his arm in the same spot.
Yeah, I agree.
That could be better blocked. I'll agree with you on that.
Yeah.
I like the
2 out of 5
moment, but I think it could be better blocked.
I don't know. There were enough moments like that made me feel very strongly that this is not worthy of a 4. And I sincerely thought about, at the beginning I was like, oh, maybe this will be a 2, and then once they were in the store I was like, oh, okay, 3.5 or 4. I like where this is going. And then ultimately it disappointed me too many times for me to give it a 3.5 or a 4. But overall I still enjoyed more than I did not enjoy. So I gave it a 3 out of 5, and I indicated that I liked it on Letterboxd. So you know what? Stop it.
Can I make a point about the special effects?
Yeah, go ahead and make your point, Zachary.
Sorry. So the special effects in this are not great. Partially because it's a lower budget movie, and I do think that they're trying to do a little bit too much with the CGI than they actually can. However, I think this is entirely a theory, but originally Frank Darabont wanted to make this movie in black and white to further kind of impress those B-movie feelings.
I'm going to talk about all this stuff, Zach.
I think that he wanted the CGI to almost look like stop motion. I think he wanted it to look like Ray Harryhausen-style monster effects from those old B-movies, which
That'd be cool.
I don't think it entirely works, but I think that's kind of what they were going for in places, because they do have that sort of herky-jerky, slow but almost too fast motion that a lot of early stop motion does have.
Reserve your objective, subjective, objective opinion, Zach, okay? Please. Goodness!
You've already taken us
Can
off
I
the
give
rails.
my opinion on the
yes.
film?
Yes.
Mitchell is here, too.
He's the host.
I like the film, okay? I liked it. I liked it more than I thought I was going to, because I've seen this quite a few times. And I'm kind of on the same page with Zach in terms of like how often I can watch this. It's not just because of the ending just taking all my life out of me, to like Doctor Strange just like coming out of my body and stuff. But I really think there's a lot that there's definitely a lot that's conveyed in terms of like factionalism and kind of ideas like that, and kind of the human struggle versus the actual horror itself, which is basically what Zach said. No, scary clown bad. Ooh, balloon. I'm scared now. It's like, but I think the monsters are definitely. I feel like they could have been used more aggressively as a background thing, if that makes sense. More aggressively used as like a kind of like a thing that kind of controls or kind of motivates the humans to do their own things and cause chaos amongst themselves.
Yeah.
And I think that's a wonderful story to tell, and I think that the acting really held that up. There's a lot of good dialogue. between them that was generally pretty compelling most of the time. And then the action sequences I think were pretty good. I do not really care too much about the CGI. We're going to talk about it. But it did not really bother me as much. I can understand how it could bother somebody. I've also seen this enough times now where I kind of know what to expect, so that might have an influence on it. But overall, I mean, in general, like the actual like choreography, I guess, or whatever you'd call it, of the actual action sequences, I thought was pretty interesting and pretty thrilling a lot of the time. So I give this a 4 out of 5. I think all major parts of it are really well done, and I think that kind of what Zach had said, a lot of the ideas that it conveys, the Stephen King ideas, are really well put out there. So yeah, I gave it a 4 out of 5. So I wanted to start with talking about the black and white version, but I was going to say that the film was made at a lower budget and with a tight turnaround schedule. So Darabont wanted a quote more fluid, ragged documentary kind of direction. So there's
George Lucas.
Fujifilm, grainy effects, and handheld stuff. And there's also a black and white version, which Darabont actually prefers over the color version. So how did the cinematography stick out to you, and would you have preferred a black and white version?
I think I would have preferred a black and white version, but if they had released a black and white version, I don't think it would have done anything. Because especially 2007, that's kind of peak black and white movies are stupid and old from mainstream audiences. Like, it wouldn't have done anything, possibly based purely on the fact that it was in black and white. But as somebody who's seen a ton of old B movies that this is referencing. I had a year where I basically just watched nothing but 50s monster movies. Like, I think I would have appreciated that and enjoyed that. Do I think mainstream audiences would have? No, not at all.
Yeah.
Man, here I am having to defend mainstream audiences again. Oh. We're getting back into the swing of things, I guess.
Season 1 is returning.
The emergence of conflict. I don't think you can honestly say that this in black and white would be an improvement if the primary reason to present it in black and white is to disguise a technical shortcoming. Like I don't really see that as like a conscious improvement so much as a covering up something that you didn't do as well as it could have been. So I want to stress to our viewers who Zach may or may not have misinformed that I do not hate black and white films. In fact, I quite enjoy Casablanca and Roman Holiday and other classics that are in black and white, and I don't consider the fact that they are not in color to be a detriment. But however, like specifically talking about The Mist, I don't think black and white would be a marked improvement because of what I said about the CGI. I feel like it's more to hide a shortcoming than it is to improve anything. And secondly, I think those human relationships and the sort of factionalism that you guys mentioned and just the fact that the relationships and the conflicts are sort of innately relatable because they really lie in human nature. I feel like black and white would serve to disconnect a modern audience member a little bit. Sort of like you're saying, Zach, honestly. Like a mainstream audience member would not connect as much with the black and white version of this, maybe. And I think that's a fair statement. But what I don't think is that it's the fault of the mainstream audience member to feel that. Because ultimately, I don't think it's a responsibility of the audience member to do the work for the art. I think the art should do the work for them.
So I just want to parry here and say that I think the black and white would do far more than just cover up the weaknesses of the CGI. And I don't think Frank Darabont is saying that just because he likes the idea of it covering up those weaknesses. I think there's something about black and white that evokes an era that this movie is plot-wise calling back to. And I also think that black and white as a visual style, there are some things that look really, really good in black and white. One of those being Mist. I think there are sequences in this that would have been beautiful in black and white. The pharmacy scene, I think, would have been very, very creepy in black and white. Perhaps more so than it is in the actual film. I mean, I think the pharmacy scene is one of the creepiest scenes in this film. But in black and white, I think it would have had a very different, almost like 40s Gothic style spookiness to it that it maybe doesn't quite have in the color version because it looks more modern.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, I'm gonna try not to sit on my fence here, and I don't know. There are definitely moments I feel like that would look amazing. Like Zach, you're exactly right. The pharmacy scene would look awesome in black and white. I feel like a lot of like in terms just from a color palette standpoint, I feel like a lot of the mist kind of serves as the contrast already with like the liveliness of what's going on in the grocery store, which has a lot of color in it. And I also think, in a lot of cases, I think the blood is a lot more shocking and the goriness is a lot more shocking in general, especially like the MP with all like the spiders and stuff coming out of him. I think that specific moment looks better in color than it would in black and white, in my humble opinion. But I haven't watched the black and white version. I don't know if I would watch it or not. I feel like, I don't know. I just feel like the color really helps capture the time period that this was in. And I did read that Darabont did not want this to be a period piece, which I will talk about. The next question concerns that. But there's a lot of like set pieces and things that are specifically mixed decades. Like the cars are mixed decades, the uniforms are mixed decades. A lot of that stuff is really mixed, and he didn't want it to be like, oh yeah, this is 2007, which obviously CGI 2007, but we're older. But I don't know. I would prefer a color version in my opinion. I don't think there's enough justification for a black and white version in a lot of cases. But I can see the artistic appeal in it, and I feel like it can convey more fleshed out emotions and even different emotions in some circumstances. But yeah, I'm with the color version. So sorry, Zach. But Guillermo del Toro actually introduced Darabont to cafe effects after Darabont asked about the effects from Pan Labyrinth. And the Lovecraftian design of the monsters was almost entirely designed by Greg Nicotero, who designed the zombies, the walkers, and the Walking Dead. So how did the monsters come across to you, counting or discounting the quality of the CGI for the time, and or compared to today's standards? Just the monsters themselves.
Yeah. I jumped in first on a lot of these. Christian, I'll give you the lead here.
Okay, sure. I'm just how to answer this without talking about the CGI at all. My answer does not talk about CGI, but it is also an indictment on the CGI, I guess, because my favorite monster was the largest monster that we only ever see as a shadow that like grabbed what's his face?
Ollie the bad boy.
Ollie.
Yeah, Ollie, and just munched him.
Yeah.
That was my favorite monster, not just because it was the biggest or whatever, but because I feel like that is like the perfect bar of visibility before it starts to become less scary the more you see it. Like the first kill with
Norm.
Normie Norm, as I like to call him.
Norm the bag boy.
Poor boy.
Yeah.
And when the tentacles were like thrashing about, I was kind of like, okay, this scene could have been like 20% as long and just as, or if not more scary. And so I do think, and I actually think this is true even when the monsters look good. Like in Jaws, for example, I think the shark looks fantastic. We're not going to get into how I feel about Jaws as a whole, but I think the shark looks fantastic, and I really like how they use it in limited places. And so even if the CGI looked better, I would still probably prefer to see the monsters a little less. But like the insects and the spiders and the like little like velociraptor type thingy, I'm just kind of indifferent on them, I guess. Like I would have just rather not seen them. But I will say I was creeped out by the bug who like bit the one girl, and then she like swelled up and like
Sally
died.
That was
sad.
I was gonna call her Mandy.
That was sad and a little creepy.
Yeah.
But I think the after effect was more frightening than the creature itself. But you know.
I should say before Zach says anything, anything detrimental. I believe that the book like barely mentions what the monsters actually look like. Is that what you're going to talk about?
That makes sense.
Zach?
I was going to mention
yeah,
that.
Stephen King barely describes them, apparently.
Yeah,
So.
something you can do in a short story and on the page that you can't necessarily do in a film is you can make something like these monsters a big part of your story without really fleshing them out fully. Because in the book they essentially just say one of them got in, it did this, it did that, and they only describe like very small details every so often. So we get this kind of vague image, and we can still kind of interpret how frightening these things might look in our mind, but we don't ever get like a full look. We don't ever get a full description that limits our imaginations. You can't do that in a film because, you know, if one of them breaks in, you have to see it. I will agree that I think the creatures are most effective when they are shrouded in the mist. The one that kills Ollie, I think that's effective. I think one of the most effective is when they're driving away towards close to the end, and this huge, like, behemoth of a creature that it just walks over them, and it's this thing that, like, is so large, like, the human mind can barely even comprehend something that big existing. And you don't really see it in full detail, but shrouded in the mist. That's very Lovecraftian horror. I think that's very effective.
Yeah.
The ones that don't really work for me are the ones we see in full detail. The insects, the pterodactyl thing, whatever it is.
Yeah.
But I will say scenes like the loading dock. I'll disagree with you, Christian, on the pace there, because I think the frightening thing about the loading dock scene and the pharmacy scene to a certain extent, scenes where we're seeing people actually torn apart by these things, the scary thing is the prolonged suffering of that character who only moments before was so confident. Because to me, that's a really frightening thing. This idea of somebody in authority, somebody who knows what they're doing, has been reduced to this, oh my god, please help me, pathetic, shivering wreck. Like, that's really frightening, I think. So seeing Norm slowly torn apart, seeing this MP writhing in pain and feeling spiders inside of him, and he can't do a thing about it, even though he was in authority only like an hour before, that's really frightening to me. And I think if those scenes went quicker, that fear wouldn't be there.
I actually do agree on the Norm bit. I think maybe, to revise my point, I think I would have liked it if there were less, like, additional tendrils that were kind of just there and, like, exploring the space, perhaps. But I do agree that there's virtue in the prolonged pain.
Yeah. Yep, I totally agree. I think the deaths are pretty effective and definitely memorable. I think we can all agree. We remember, like, when everybody dies, basically.
Yeah.
Anybody important, at least. I wonder if the Burn boy, I guess he's okay. I don't know. Did he get the... I don't know. If he... R.I.P., you know, should have listened in elementary school when they told us what to do with the fire stuff. But anyway, I like the another part of, like, how prolonged everybody's deaths are, is that how shocked everybody is, and how, like, you can, on one hand you can be like, oh yeah, they're in shock, so that means I can think up, like, the director be like, I can think up, like, all these different ways, like, how they have to die, and everybody's being incompetent. So to justify their incompetence, they're all in shock. But I think the shock comes across effective enough for each scene where it's totally believable that these people are like, what the hell's going on? Like when Jim is, like, staring at the spider for, like, a billion years, and he's like, ah! You know, and like the spider's just like, and because it was darker, I think in that specific moment the spider looked good. But but I agree with the close-up stuff as well. I don't think I think the close-ups were definitely the worst parts, especially the flying stuff was definitely, like, the worst.
Yeah, their little faces, too much.
Yeah. So I guess I was gonna mention this earlier, but I can segue with the adaptation part of this whole thing. So Christian, do you think this comes across as a novel adaptation? And Zach, do you think that the parts that were taken from the novel and not included were good or bad?
Well, having not read the original story, It does kind of have the feeling of an adaptation, I guess. I can't remember exactly if I had that thought before I read that it was or not, but I guess that uncertain memory would suggest that it does come across as an adaptation, which I think is fine. You know, I'm not really I'm not one of these people that is really up in arms about every adaptation needing to be something especially different in order to be worthwhile or good. So, and I don't know. I guess I'd say I'm indifferent on it, and I haven't really read any Stephen King for that matter. So I couldn't really give you a strong idea of how faithfully it adapts the feeling or not. But I think it works basically as well as it would have were it not an adaptation. I don't think it's really held back by the text or or detrimental to the text.
I completely agree.
Yeah.
I don't think there's I don't there's some moments where it seems a little bit theatrical to the point as if it was literary, but I've seen movies that have had more fleshed out dialogue that's a lot more theatrical didn't come from text at all. So honestly, if you told me it wasn't from a book, I'd totally believe you. So
I, as somebody who has read a lot of Stephen King, including this original short story, this totally feels like Stephen King to me. For one thing, it's set in Maine. Stephen King sets basically everything in Maine because that's where he lives. There's also little nods to previous Stephen King stories throughout. When Thomas Jane picks up the newspaper, when he picks up the newspaper in the grocery store, it's the Castle Rock Times. There's a whole series of books by Stephen King set in Castle Rock. The spiders and everything, the Arrowhead experiment is pointed to in The Dark Tower, which is like the backbone of Stephen King's literary universe.
The posters in the beginning.
The poster at the beginning. The one he's painting is a nod to The Dark Tower. So there's those little Stephen King nods throughout. But then in terms of theme as well, people turning on each other, huge Stephen King theme. Hypocritical faith being used to misguide the masses. Huge Stephen King theme. So there's those definite adaptation aspects that run throughout. And this is a pretty loyal adaptation. The only thing that they really change is the ending, which I imagine you probably have a separate question on. But I think the ending that they have here, I like it way more than the ending of the story. I think it's bold. I think it's
Zach,
risky.
Stop answering questions ahead of time.
I really enjoy it. But I'm not going to go into full detail so that Mitchell can ask that question later.
Stay tuned in the next 5 minutes. Okay. So I was just going to ask one more question, okay? Can you handle it?
I can.
Mrs. Carmody is played by Marcia Gay Harden, who apparently had called fellow actor Andre Braugher to tell him she can't do this because it's her first horror film. And Braugher essentially says, view it as an actor's piece and not just a monster movie. So since she's such a large presence and kind of an integral part of the film, what did you think of her performance? And do you think that the factionalism that was presented was realistic? And do you think that it worked well with the horror aspects that we've come to know and love for the past 100 years, basically?
Yeah, I think that she grounds the real threat of the movie, I think, the real horror of the movie. She's what sort of turns this into kind of a serious, dramatic story in addition to a silly monster movie. And I don't think that the factionalism that's presented as a result of her character is unrealistic. I mean, not to get topical, but over the past year and a half, we've seen people forming factions like this due to reasons of religion or political belief or whatever. When you put people in a situation where they don't know what's going on and where they're afraid, they're going to turn on each other, and they're going to do crazy, illogical, violent things.
Zach Shapiro.
This is... All right. But I'm serious. I'm really serious.
Yes.
I totally agree when Ollie in this film says that human beings are fundamentally insane. You put two in a room together and they start dreaming up reasons to kill each other. I absolutely agree with that.
Of course you do.
Yes.
Of course
I have very little faith in mankind, if you haven't guessed, dear listener.
Zach has very little faith in anything. So, I had actually read a lot of critical reviews when this had come out, and there's a lot of people mentioning post 9/11 feelings and stuff for some reason. And I was like, wow, there's a lot of people that are really this when this film came out very specifically. There was a lot of things going on in 2007. So a lot of people, it was a big thing about the religious fanatics that were really involved in the Bible and interpreting it and things like that, and living in the Deep South or things like that, the Bible Belt, and really committed religious conservatives. And then you also had kind of the left-leaning people in the cities and things like that that were coming with their own perspectives, and there's always clashing of heads, and especially with foreign policy and things like that. But I think that really does come across, and I think it's a really timeless message in a lot of cases, especially what we've seen the past few years, like Zach had said. And I think it's applicable to a lot of things, and I think it's something that you rarely ever see in a horror film, and I think it's really well integrated here. And I think that her performance particularly gives a very cliche, look at like, oh, I can just quote the Bible right here and solve everybody's problems. And then, and as the analysis, as it goes on, as she gains followers and things like that, I felt that was very natural.
Yeah.
And when you're in a chaotic, situation like that has never happened before, and you kind of just fall back on your instincts and, this Darwinist sort of situation, than survival of the fittest, then it's very easy for stuff like this to happen. So it's a really big creative outlet, and I think it was used really well here.
Yeah, I pretty much agree. I don't have much to add. I think you summed it up well, Mitchell. I maybe I have slightly more faith in the human race than Zach does, but I still think your points are well made, and I agree that it's a timeless idea being presented effectively.
Well, okay, we can talk about the ending now.
Yes.
The only thing more controversial than American politics is the ending to The Mist. So, Stephen King actually liked the ending, and thought it really worked for the film. In the book, as David is putting Billy to sleep after they've stopped off for the night, because it's them two. And
Hold
then,
on,
like, two
putting
others
him
or
to
something.
sleep? Can we clarify what that phrase means in this context?
Putting him to bed.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Sleeping. So he whispers two words in his ear, Hartford and Hope, because Hartford was like the city they were going to or something. Zach and okay, thank you for the confirmation. So David picks up a brief radio transmission with the word Hartford in it, and then he chooses to believe that the city might offer some type of sanctuary. So they go there, and that's how it ends. And then Darabont's like, "Oh, this is too Hitchcockian," and that it's like a cheap shot. So he just has everybody just freaking murked at the end. Big spoiler, guys. It's one of the most notorious horror film endings ever.
Oh yeah.
And then the military comes and saves everybody. Yay! Yay! All their dead bodies. And then David's like, ah! And that's how it ends. So what did you guys think about the traumatic ending? Okay, what do you think of it?
I think it's great. I think it's not only one of the best movies ever to a horror film, I think it's one of the best endings ever to a film. I love this ending because it is so frustrating, because you can't stop thinking if they had only waited an instant longer, they would have been fine. They all would have been fine. Like, he wouldn't have had to kill his son, he wouldn't have had to kill the two old people or the lady. Like, they all would have been fine if they'd waited an instant. But, like, if you put yourself in their mindset, there's no reason to. Like, that sounds like something that's going to come over the hill and kill them in a horrible way. He's promised his son he's not going to let the monsters get him. Like, he's doing the right thing based on all the evidence that he has, only to learn that the right thing was the absolute wrong thing. It's totally maddening. It doesn't give you an inch of closure or slack or relief at all. It's exhausting, it's depressing, and I love it. I think it's an amazing ending.
Okay, where do I start? Well, I agree that it's immensely frustrating, for sure. Well, I have... Okay, to go back to what I had to say about the whole adaptation balance thing.
Yes.
I do tend to have an issue when an adaptation strays so dramatically from the source material. Usually I don't like that, and this is one of those cases. It does help that I guess Stephen King liked it, but yeah. I still just I guess I'm a traditionalist or originalist or whatever it is you'd call it. I do think adherence to the text is generally a good thing. And secondly, I just felt like even if they're hearing the creature coming, which by the way, it turns out it wasn't the creature, so whatever they heard was a fairly distant sound.
It was the tanks.
Yes, one distant enough that they couldn't properly identify what it was. I cannot believe for a second that the character that we spent an entire movie with would willingly shoot and kill his son in any circumstance. Unless maybe if he saw the monster like in front of his eyes, maybe then. But I very fundamentally disagree with it, and I agree that it's frustrating, but I don't think it's good. To me, it felt kind of cheap, and I just wasn't convinced at all. I'm sorry, Zach, but it just didn't. I was frustrated, and when he did at the end, when he's like flailing and blah blah blah, or when he's in anguish, I was Mitchell laughing at Adam Driver is what I was then.
Oh my god, grief isn't dignified. I love those screams because they, at a first glance, they look and they seem silly, but grief isn't dignified. Horrendous grief is awkward and uncomfortable, and it doesn't look glorious or cinematic at all. It just makes you feel like you don't want to be there, and it looks silly, and and it was an inevitability. There was no other way.
Okay, when I was watching when I was watching Ben Swallow cry, it was because Ben Swallow was crying. It was not because Charlie. I felt bad for Charlie. Like, I knew it was an emotional scene, right? So I'll just say that.
My point is, I think there are things.
I didn't mean to gaslight you, Mitchell.
I think there are things about this ending that I hate to be that you didn't understand it, because I don't think you didn't understand it. I think there are things about it that you might. There's no way to say this. That doesn't make me sound like an unutterable ponce. I think that the point of the ending is that, based on all the evidence that they have, it's inevitable. They're out of gas. They've seen how quickly these things kill. And the mist is so thick that if something gets there, there's no guarantee that he's going to have time to kill his friends and his son mercifully and quickly. So he's making sure he's protecting his son in the one last way that he can, and sacrificing himself. That's why at the end he's so grief-ridden, he's desperate to be killed himself. And the one last kick in the gut that Frank Darabont gives this character is that he doesn't have that mercy. He's done the most horrible thing that he can possibly do as a father, and he's been saved in the instant when he wishes he could be anything but.
Okay, that's all fair. The last thing I'll say about this is I am just generally like I don't conceptually agree with the idea of mercy killing myself. Just like, I guess that's like a personal thing, but I don't think it makes a ton of sense unless maybe if you're entirely certain that the thing is going to happen, which in this case they weren't, because that's what makes the ending so tragic, because they were wrong, Zach. They were wrong.
They were wrong.
Okay, I'm declaring this episode an extended episode because this discussion is too valuable.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
This is one case where I definitely think we can. They were certain. They had driven for miles and miles and seen no sign of society. They'd seen no sign of hope. This thing can't possibly be human, and it's coming. It's going to kill them. It's a certainty, and the tragedy is that they're wrong when they were so certain. I feel like I'm on Fox News or something.
No, you're wrong.
Yeah, pretty much. I have nothing else to say. I just think that they were wrong, and so that's annoying, and they were wrong, and it's dumb.
I think
you're so close to the point, but you're just missing it.
I'm going to ascend into the clouds and destroy everyone with some facts and logic.
Oh yeah, I'm ready.
I don't think it's worth necessarily justifying what decisions he would make in the time, because like I had said with the creative outlet thing, I feel like you kind of can't really make an argument. It's kind of like saying, why didn't they? It's kind of something that horror movies have done before, but sometimes it gets so unrealistic and so unjustified that it's like, wow, you really made a stupid decision. However, I'm making the shape of a but I think that in terms of these circumstances, that they've developed so well this circumstance of horror and detriment and exhaustion amongst all of the characters. They're just so done with everything, and they're just ready to die. And this is displayed quite often in The Walking Dead. And The Walking Dead characters, most of the time, make really good decisions in the first season. But to not to digress. But I do like this ending on a moral level. I feel like it really matches the tone that was consistent throughout the whole film. Just constant dissatisfaction, constant trying and failing. And I think it's just the inevitability, like Zach had mentioned. I feel like that's a really prevalent theme, and I know there's some things that had to be like squandered, like some decisions that weren't necessarily the best decisions leading up to that point, but all that detriment that was so well built up to that point, I feel like that it was so well written, and so believable. By that point, I could have basically believed a whole lot of different things the characters could have done. They could have just walked out, started taking their clothes off and screaming maniacally, and I would have believed it, just because of how well those characters were developed. So honestly, I really like the ending a lot better. I had actually seen an alternate version somewhere, and I'm looking it up, and I cannot find it for the life of me. But I'm pretty sure they just drive away, and it's kind of similar to the ending of The Birds, I feel like, with the Hitchcockian influence there. They kind of just drive away. It's like, I wonder if they're going to make it or not. But I don't think, it's just, there's too much optimism, you know? It's just too much, like, hope in there, and it's just, like, it just doesn't match. Like, the dude, the freaking David had, like, nothing good going for him the entire time, except protecting his son, and he couldn't even do that. So I feel like there's a lot more risk there's a lot more risk involved, and I feel like it paid off a lot better than just being safe and going with the book ending. Yeah, in my humble opinion.
You know what I recognized on this viewing that makes it even more painful? Just twist the knife even further. The military comes from the way they came. The military comes from where they were. Meaning, if they had drank the Kool-Aid and given up on surviving and stayed with Miss Carmody and just decided to praise Jesus, they probably would have lived.
Yeah. Yep. And adds to, like, you know, there's not a good or right or wrong when it comes to factionalism. Yeah. Really, humanity's wrong is kind of the final determination.
That made me go, that much harder when I watched the ending this time, though.
Yeah. And Carol, Melissa McBride, showing up at the very being end, like, I just want to go home. And I'm like, I'm not helping you go home. I'm like, I'm going to go home now. Goes home. Yeah. What? Christian, what do you have to say?
Wow. I don't know if I want to say this, but
yes, you do.
I feel like before he, like, decides to kill them, because he's a freaking dummy, he, like, looks at the grandparents and he looks at his wife, and they're all kind of, like, terrified but nodding, and they reach a consensus. Shouldn't the kid have some say in whether he's going to die or not? Honestly, I know that's maybe a crazy thing to say because he's a kid and they think they're doing it. They believe that they are doing what is best for the child. I understand that, but I think given everything that the kid has lived through over the course of the film, I don't think it would be the craziest idea to at least involve him in the decision, and that does leave a bit of a bitter taste in my mouth. Like he was summarily executed, basically. It was not like assisted suicide. It was what they thought was a mercy kill, but wasn't.
I'm of the opinion that kids don't know anything, and the kid in this situation, the kid's opinion in this situation, I think, is sort of irrelevant because
it's his life.
He's Zach. A 7-year-old. But you present a 7-year-old with the only two options they have in that situation. Do you want to die or do you want to die? And the 7-year-old is going to say that he wants to eat a sandwich. Like, a 7-year-old.
The options aren't. Those
a 7-year-old is not able to make that decision.
The options are: do you want to die right now, or do you want to risk dying at the hands of a monster that may or may not show up in 5 seconds?
But
that's the same thing.
A kid with that level of
a kid can't make that
eventually
decision.
It gets to the
a kid doesn't have the knowledge or the wisdom or even the frame of mind to make that kind of decision. And I will point out that the kid also didn't really live through most of the events in this movie. The kid most of the time is tucked in the back, sleeping or under a storage blanket. He didn't go to the pharmacy. He didn't see what these things can do to people. The dad did.
He saw some of it.
And the dad wants to make sure that doesn't happen to his son.
Well, eventually you have to
fundamentally
take matters,
disagree, but whatever.
You have to take matters into your own hands. You have to, when you're presented with a state of nature, okay, Thomas Hobbes. When you're presented with a state of nature, you have to eventually start making the fight or flight decisions. Flight being flying as an angel in this case, because they dead.
I have a feeling we're gonna get in a lot of trouble over this episode.
Oh yeah, we definitely are. But I'm just like I it's just sometimes you cannot empathize. Sometimes it gets to the point where you just cannot empathize with the character. As much as one would want to empathize with someone in a terrible situation like that, like I had said, there's kind of Darabont's got you. He's got you. He's got you tied up. You cannot leave. You are in for the ride. You are going up and down this amusement park ride. This roller coaster.
Can I also point out that I think the fact that we're having this heated discussion also kind of indicates that the ending worked.
Oh, jeez.
Get
Get out of here.
That's true.
I don't think the ending is meant to be difficult, and it's meant to leave you feeling like, oh wow, like it's meant to leave you thinking. And the fact that we have all thought about this and are debating those perspectives, I think means that the ending works in the way that it was intended to.
I know it's meant to be difficult and uncomfortable. That's not my issue with it. My issue with it is not just moral, but it also to me feels like something of a shortcut. And I will concede. I think Mitchell is kind of right when he says we can't empathize with these characters to a full extent because we cannot imagine what it is that they've been through. So I don't know. I just fundamentally disagree. I don't think it's worth
Fundamentally disagrees.
Yeah.
Well, you're wrong.
Okay.
Final thoughts. I don't even know. You know what? You're not allowed.
Yeah,
not
I
allowed.
think
no
we've
more no final thoughts.
Sad.
I think we're done here.
We've said everything about this film at this point. I think.
Let us know, viewers. Did you like the ending? Click like and subscribe to our YouTube channel.
Please do let us know what you think of the ending, though, because I think on the off chance that we can start some kind of a discourse, this would be really interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we should take the messages we learned about factionalism and start factions right now about the ending.
Yeah.
Stephen King is the one he's got Darabont on the what's it called, the marionette doll or whatever. Stephen King's the ultimate guy. He's figured everything out. But.
Oh boy.
All right, I'm gonna make the executive decision not to do Magical Cinema Tour because we are a little over time.
We can save it. We can review that.
Week in review. Boom.
I have something to contribute for Week in Review.
Go ahead, Zachy.
I yesterday watched, or rather I should say rewatched, Chinatown, directed by Roman Polanski. And I really, really like Chinatown, more than I remembered liking it. I had kind of forgotten how exciting it is, because it's very obviously inspired by classical noirs. But when you think of noirs like The Maltese Falcon and Double Indemnity, I think you think of intrigue and suspense and mystery, but you don't really think of action all that often. But Chinatown, I think, has that action. It's got plenty of fistfights. It's got a car chase with a man being pursued by a man on a horse with a shotgun. It's got Roman Polanski almost cutting Jack Nicholson's nose off in a very good bit of practical effects. It's a really exciting and enjoyable movie. I 5 out of 5. It's basically a perfect movie, and I really do recommend it.
Totally. I'm just gonna retweet Zach's week and omit my own week and pass it on to Mitchell.
Oh my gosh! Okay, Christian has to eliminate himself from this entire podcast.
You guys eliminated me when we were discussing eliminations, so here we are.
Well, I saw Boy State, and that's what I'm talking about now. I saw Greyhound, and then I just remembered I did not see Greyhound. I actually saw Boy State, the only other Apple Plus film I care about, and I thought it was really well done. And I did attend Maryland's Boy State. The documentary covers Texas Boy State. But essentially it follows these an absurdly large group of 17-year-old boys with too much time on their hands when it comes to reading about political literature and the current goings-on in their state and how government works. And then it's sponsored by the American Legion. It's very interesting. I think just, kind of, we can compare this to The Mist, where it's just a bunch of people that end up being factionalized, and then there's religious zealots that are like, oh yeah, I really liked Ronald Reagan, so that's why I'm here. And but no, I think the kids are really relatable. I think it's really fun to watch them spar, and I think it really says a lot about society because we live in a society. And
get along with this society.
I recommend it. Yes, I recommend it to anyone who's interested in state politics in general, who's interested in watching a bunch of masculine and I guess not so masculine 17-year-old boys duke it out for the governor's office and for their state party chairs and such. And I think it's really interesting, especially coming from, the past couple years, as we had talked about. I will not retread that probably ever again. So yes, I recommend it 4 out of 5.
Cool.
So Christian can just leave now. I guess. I'm just kidding. The rundown.
Let's do that. Oh man, get me out of here.
We know what
Mitchell,
the rundown is. Numbers.
Are you
Zach,
freaking ready,
numbers.
Mitchell?
I am freaking ready. Am I going first?
I'm ready too.
You're going first. You sure are.
Zach's
Okay.
ready. Steve Harvey's ready
Zach,
too. Okay.
I should have put something about the murder of this child. Okay. 3, 2.
At least he wasn't drowned in the bathtub.
Go.
The Food House.
4 out of 5.
Arnim Zola as Chad Grocery Man.
3 out of 5.
Corporate handouts and building bombs.
3 out of 5.
Panic buying toilet paper.
2 out of 5.
Hitting your head and falling.
3 out of 5.
Closed room dramas.
4 out of 5.
Duct tape and dog bags.
3 out of 5.
Dog food bags.
Strong ensemble performances.
4 out of 5.
Flamethrower grandma.
4 out of 5.
Fear of the unknown.
4 out of 5.
Stephen King plagiarizing the Bible.
3 out of 5.
Little Normie Norm.
3 out of 5.
Attack of the Flying 2007 CGI.
3 out of 5.
Lawsuits.
2 out of 5.
Bible quote plot armor.
2 out of 5.
Having a friend. God.
3 out of 5.
Sam Witwer screaming maniacally.
3 out of 5.
Cicadas.
2 out of 5.
Waifu gone.
2 out of 5.
Welcome to Sesame Street. Today's word expiation.
3 out of 5.
Time.
Star Killer causing everything. I can't answer
I can't
that
believe
last
you-
one.
Mitchell, the only way you could
What
ever
did
get
Mitchell
me
do?
not to rebut to that is to stick it right before the sacred rundown in which once the timer starts, we start.
Anyway, this has been episode 2, The Changeling.
First off, Christian, what are we talking about next time?
Oh, jeez. I don't know. Okay. Oh, this is actually quite exciting. This is something of a debut for us. Not our first comic book movie, as that honor goes to Scott Pilgrim, but our first superhero movie. We will be watching Batman: Mask of the Phantasm, an animated movie that's sort of tied into the animated series that's critically acclaimed, of course, starring Kevin Conroy as the voice of Bruce Wayne in Batman. And I'm really excited to talk about the ways in which this film explores Batman on a more emotional level than some of the other projects might.
Yeah, it'll be nice to talk about something a little lighter after this episode.
Goodness. I don't even know what to do. I'm just glad Zach didn't choose this and I did, honestly. Because,
Yes.
I don't know how bad it could have got. But anyway, it's been episode 31. 31 days in the month of 30 days May, but it's June. Episode 31. Cookie Pocket. This podcast is about film. We talked about The Mist, and we now regret it. So, sayonara, kids.
Adios.
Bye.